I am going to be brief and perhaps talk a little bit about how this all means in practice. So I came to Tokyo 2 years ago, and up until then, I was in the UN Department of Peace Operations. And in particular, I was covering Sudan and South Sudan for the most part of my 20-year career in the UN. Back in, say, it was 2019, so I was overseeing one of the largest peacekeeping missions, which was in Darfur. And we were actually downsizing the mission. And yet, the conflict wasn't over. And even today, we know that Sudan is in the full-blown civil war between the military and the paramilitary force called Rapid Support Forces. And we knew that once the peacekeepers leave, that Rapid Support Forces would take over our camps and use it to target civilians. But then, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? And how do you know that it's even happening? We were no longer there, and if you have seen the picture of Darfur, it's in the middle of nowhere. And we cannot even fly our own helicopters without the consent of the government of Sudan. And certainly, the government of Sudan was not going to give us the permission to fly and look at our camps. So, I contacted Mr. Ohm's team, GIS team, in the UN Secretariat and asked whether we can actually look at our camps from the sky. And 3 days later, indeed, we got the maps with analysis from your team, because I am direction challenged. My friends know that I get lost, even with a GPS. And I'm not machine savvy at all either. So I need analysis from the experts who could identify what I'm looking at. Here are the vehicles. And given the size of the vehicles, these are regular cars, or these are the trucks. These could be military vehicles, right? They could tell from the size and shape of the things from the map. And based on that, I could then write a statement to the Security Council saying that this camp was not used by the RSF yet. However, we see some signs of mobilization around this camp. So in practice, this is how, in 2019, we used the maps and satellite imagery and GIS expertise within the building. But things have changed since, as we know. Right? Technology is advancing. So another example is, say, Ukraine 2 years ago. We knew that the Russian forces were gathering. But there was no confirmation yet at the time, because this happened on 24th of February. We did not have confirmation yet that they were actually going to invade Ukraine. A lot of speculations, but the Russians were saying that, no, it's just a military exercise, we don't plan on a war, blah, blah, blah. And the media also was split. Not many people believe that Putin would actually invade Ukraine. But this is an image from a project partner in California. They were, of course, watching from the sky. And from the photo, they were confident that this is not the regular military exercise once they saw the hospital units. For the training, you don't need hospitals. But if you're planning for longer, serious operation, then yes, you need the medical units. And they saw not only the APC, the armored personnel carriers and tanks and so forth, they also saw the hospitals. And that's when they're pretty confident that this was going to happen soon or later. Then, a friend who spoke to us about a year ago through a similar event like this, he was also watching social media. And he saw 3 in the morning, there was a traffic jam in the border area between Russia and Ukraine. And that's when he knew that this was the beginning of the war. And he reported it 3 hours before the New York Times reported an incident. This was 2 years ago. So this is the little that I'm going to talk about today, that combination of the mapping technology and social media, AI, how things are evolving rapidly, and how do we respond to it and also to engage it. Right. So a few words about how researchers, policymakers, journalists, and people like us in the UN actually using the mapping technology. Right? We already saw this from Tony's presentation, the UNOSAT imagery, right? And then also the data, as a lot of speakers have already spoken about. By the way, the UNOSAT, the UN, we don't actually have our own satellites. Right, and we have tech expertise, but not the actual satellites. So we actually purchase imageries, and also the governments provide the imageries. We also use the commercial ones. And this one came from the US, I think. But for example, another one, the top one is also the US, but the bottom one's from China. So we work with partners, we need partners. And that's why the digital volunteers that our speaker has spoken about, it's a partnership that we rely on. Without it, we are pretty much limited in our own capacities. But then it enters the AI. Right? This is one tiny area, the orange one, in Afghanistan. It's in a camp for internally displaced people, IDP camp. If you take that image, this is what you get, right? The satellite imagery. But then, how do we know which ones are actual tents and which ones are shadows? There are parts that not quite, you can get the sense of the area, but if you want to provide aid in a way that you explain to your donors and governments and people who are making donations, you need to be sure. Then you train the machines to recognize the boundaries of each tent. And it becomes clearer, the data become more precise. Right? So this is a machine learning. Machines can detect the edges, and you begin to see the models that our previous speakers spoke about. So within the UN, there are a couple initiatives, and we already heard about the GIS and the UN maps, but let me also tell you a little bit about the Global Pulse. This is a sort of Secretary General's initiative, so it's sort of one of the main UN initiatives since 2009. And they try to bring these all innovations together. Okay, the Global Pulse, they try to bring the data and visualizations and AI and so forth together, and for different purposes. And you already heard this, so I'm not going to go way into it. Detect the areas that you want to survey. Right? You also do machine learning and the data detection and the visualization. So you get the better sense of what you're looking at and what you want to respond to and how you want to address the crisis. You can do for the roof density to see the damages. What else is there? And so forth and so forth. So, but anyway, this is one example from the UN, the Global Pulse, and they do this also for SDGs, climate change, and so forth, as a previous speaker said. And now they're trying to combine, we're not quite there yet, because we're the UN and we have all this ethical and legal considerations, but they're trying to also match this with the crowdsourcing. Yeah? I mean, we saw the Ushahidi references in the PowerPoints. Basically, right, you have your mobile phone, and if you're in the crisis spot, and you report on your own. And the information that you provide goes to the website or the central location. And sometimes this location is managed by people who are going to verify. Sometimes you are trained as the reporters yourselves and do the same thing. And now this crowdsourcing is also, a fascinating area because you yourself can be a participant and reporter. But at the same time, then we also have to think about misinformation, disinformation. But that's where we are now. And go back to how we use this information for our own analysis and response. This is another example of the UN Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs, UNDPP, and they do conflict response and analysis and mediation, peacemaking, and negotiations, and so forth. But to help the peace negotiation, you need to understand the conflict, and to understand conflict better, we can use digital tools now. And for example, this is Iraq. All of us, right, including Hitotsubashi students, we start the social science education with the ancient civilizations and how the water, right, the river is essential for any civilization, whether it's a Nile or the Euphrates Tigris and the big river in China. And this river, right, the Euphrates Tigris, that have been feeding the population for over 2,000 years, are drying up. During the drought, 2021, more than 50% of the Tigris was lost. And you can imagine in a place like Iraq, what happens when you don't have water. So you can, again, get the satellite imagery, you can do analysis, topography analysis, and you combine with also the data on social conflicts, where the crashes are taking place. And you begin to see the landscape of conflict and climate change. And again, this was summarized in a report to the Secretary General, and based on this, now UNDP, UN Development Program in Iraq, tries to address the water issue in their program to address intercommunal conflicts and reconciliation efforts. This one is from Oxford University, and I probably need to. And Oxford, this is the one example of the data visualization and the sense making that the previous speakers talked about. They layer different aspects of conflict on the geospatial map. Thank you. So that you begin to see, thank you. Not only the locations and dates of the conflict events, the clashes or the IED, the remote violence. So yes, not only these dates and locations, but which actors, right? And there's so many, right? In conflict situations, we no longer see government versus opposition. We see, right, terrorist elements, we see militias, we see criminal networks. So you can design your questions. What do you want to understand? Do you want to understand who fights, or how long, or what the hotspots are, so that you can deploy your resources accordingly? So this is yet another example of visualization and data layering. So just to recap, okay. So go back and then the recap, right? Why are we talking about this today? Because, right, we want to understand what's happening. We want to understand where and when, so that we can respond. We also want to make sure that with the information you provide early warning. It's a little difficult with the earthquakes, but the research shows that in the case of floods, for example, the hurricanes and so forth, right, you can actually alert people in vulnerable locations. You can monitor and report, of course. Collect data. And that's one element, again, that I want to stress. In that it's also a very powerful journalistic citizen participation tool. You can report yourself. You can actually be a digital volunteer and respond. We can raise a public awareness. And you can, again, within the age of misinformation, disinformation, you want to know, right, whether what you're seeing on the Twitter, well, X is real or not. And now you can actually do the machine learning to pick up, right, the likely keywords from the actual eyewitnesses to tell the difference between the real eyewitness stories and the fake and news media. And then you can actually do that. Technology is there to an extent, not 100%, but to an extent, verify what is the real information or not. And with the regenerative AI coming, this is going to be ever more critical, that we actually think about how to tell the truth. And moreover, the question was, so what? Great, right, where the events are taking place, where the fightings are taking place. You know where the vulnerable locations are. But it does not mean that AI actually goes there. From the knowledge of what we talked about today to actually make things happen, you need all different kinds of things. You need a system in place to respond. You need the people who are going to make decisions. You need a system to communicate the knowledge and make sure that these people are going to evacuate, right, within the next 3 days. And that is not, right, the technology, something that technology can resolve on its own. You need a people system. And that's why I think where the digital technology and social sciences are coming together, and the society as a whole. One last thought that I was going to mention, which is about how to protect people who are going to report. This is critical in crisis situations, but I think that I'm gonna actually end here, and if there are questions from the floor about the ethics, I can come back to it, but I think the discussions have been more about the tools. So I'll end here and open for questions and answers and dialogue.
Thank you, Sumie.